group. What grades? Donna, you teach?
I'm an instructional coach for middle school,
Okay, give me a grade.
8th.
8th grade, okay? So we're all 8th grade students, okay? So Donna, Tracy, Heather, Sam, congratulations. You made it to 8th grade. That's a good thing. Tony,
Can I go to the bathroom?
we just came back.
Well, I'm saying, you're saying be 8th grade students, so this would be the
That's
right when you're
right.
giving instructions is a perfect time.
Tony, what's
Ask
the
if you could
kid's
do something
answer
that
when
has
I
nothing to
say
do with
that, when
class.
the teacher says that, but you just came back? What's the kid
I
respond?
forgot. I don't know. I
really
forgot.
have to go.
Yeah, well,
I really have to go. All right, so what we're gonna do is model here for the rest of you what this thing called the question formulation technique. And if you're interested in getting students engaged in question, if suppose you think that students, let's suppose we did a unit on the Civil War, and now we're going to be doing inquiry activity on the Civil War. Should every kid or every group do the same inquiry? Or should we let student interest, as long as it's on the Civil War, what's your thinking on that? How necessary would it be to have every kid do the same inquiry? I'm far less interested than the colleagues that went right before me. So when people don't ask, I'm just going to ask you. Tracy, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, my thought is that they don't have to all do the exact same inquiry, but I feel like the Civil War is really, really wide open. And so I feel like there needs to be some sort of focus, like we need to be thinking about backwards design and what our outcome and what our takeaways need to be. And I think there can be some wiggle room within that, but I think there needs to be some focus so that we're thinking about takeaways and what we want students to take away.
But at the end, wouldn't that make it really boring for all the students to listen to their summative whatever, look at their posters? It's all going to have the same information if it was the same question, or if it's all, I think they would be really bored.
I didn't say that it should be the same.
Right, right.
Yeah, so
I think you're both in a way agreeing with each other on that.
Yeah.
So what, and by the way, why would some teachers, just in fairness, why would some teachers say, yes, that every group should do the same inquiry? Can anybody give an argument that some teachers would give for that?
Because their standard says they have to know this about the Civil War.
Correct. That's oftentimes it's a standard-based decision, and who's going to knock the standards, right? But
I think another reason
please.
is that it's easier to manage. I don't know whether that would be something that would be articulated or conscious necessarily, but I think it probably would be, you know, the just the management and, you know, feeling of control would be another reason.
Right.
And I'm also wondering if, because it's inquiry, their outcomes might be slightly different, and that's okay too.
Yeah. Point well taken. But I think, and an answer I've also heard, how would you respond to this? Well, what if a group wants to do an inquiry that I meaning the teacher, what if a group wants to do an inquiry I don't know anything about? On a topic I know nothing about, what would be your response to that? Is that a valid point I'm asking you? How can I evaluate I've heard this, that how can I evaluate a project that I know nothing about the subject? Donna, I gotta go to you again. Donna, I'm going to you again. You're an
I think Lauren's in
instructional
there. Let's
coach
get
here.
Lauren
Is
in
that
there.
a valid argument? What if I don't know anything about the thing? How can I help them? How
Yeah.
can I evaluate them?
I would definitely ask the teachers some reflective questions about why they are worried about that, and sort of what they want the students to do in a situation where they have a question and don't know anything about the answer, and how to model an appropriate response to that, to get some information and not to hide behind not knowing something.
Right. Lauren, go ahead. You're muted though. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add that if you have a well-written rubric, as long as the students are meeting the criteria according to the rubric, that shouldn't be a problem.
Right. And I might also suggest that to some, this might be a radical thought, but that the student could actually, the teacher could actually learn along with the student. I know that's way out on the edge, but you know, that might be a possibility as well. But let's just work through. And who's our group? It's Heather, it's Donna, it's Tracy, and Sam. Are you still with us there? Sam I couldn't have scared her away with this, but Lauren, you want to pick up instead of Sam? Would you mind doing this?
I'll try.
We're just okay. Who's our scribe here? This is like a class. It takes 10 minutes to do these. No, I'm just joking with you guys. Okay, Lauren's going to be the scribe. Okay, so Lauren, we're going to do some stuff. And so the first part of this, remember our guide, and Lauren as the scribe, what is the unit or the lesson? What's the unit that you want this inquiry to be on? Pick a unit, or Sam, you're back. We've got a group of 5 now. Sam, you're the Native American person. Give us a unit in Native American history you want this inquiry to be on.
Land ownership.
How about the topic of land ownership? Okay. And this is for Native, are we just doing the general topic of land ownership or? Okay, so our
I'd say, yeah.
topic that we're studying is land ownership. Okay, now if we look,
So I say that because being a Native American topic person, you could pick multiple perspectives, right? Students could learn different sides. And if you maybe pick the same location, maybe Connecticut,
how
you
about
could
land
structure it a
ownership
little more.
how about that? That's a little more, that's a little, so land ownership in Connecticut. Okay, so according to this thing called the question formulation technique, by the way, which you can find a million resources on if you go to the website, the Right Question Institute. So what we're doing here is we're going to, step 1, you notice land ownership is in Connecticut is our question focus. What we're going to do now is have our group produce questions on that topic. And as it says here, ask as many questions as you can. There's no judgment to your questions. Our scribe is going to write our questions down. And if somebody produces as a statement, you turn them into questions. All right. So can you see what we're doing as a group? All we've got is a topic, land ownership in Connecticut. By the way, Sam, in record, I would guess that would have been the last thing that I would come up with for a topic, but we're running with it. We're running with it. So how about we've got Tracy, we've got Heather, we've got Donna, we got Sam, we got Lauren as our scribe, who's going to write down all of the questions. So could I ask Tracy, Sam, Heather, Donna, ask it with no judgment of any question, just what are your questions on that topic? And Lauren, you're going to write the questions down as they come in, either on your computer or however you want to do it.
I have a question. I'm sorry. Is this the teachers preparing the lesson, or are you asking the students? Is this to get your compelling and supportive questions?
We're all, for the sake of argument, Tracy, Heather, Donna, Sam, and Lauren are all fifth grade students,
Okay, so
or whatever grade. Is it eighth grade? Whatever grade we are. We're eighth. What
Thank
grade
you.
were we?
You said
Sam, what grade are we?
Fourth grade, or are we all eighth grade?
Let's be all eighth grade students.
thank you.
That'll raise the level of sophistication immensely.
Should I ask you to go to the bathroom again?
Yeah, right. Tony, you know what their job for him always is? When you got there's always the guy on the side, you know what? You can be the reporter. How about that? That's when there's nothing else to do, you're the reporter. But go ahead, group, ask some questions, whatever questions you have about land ownership in Connecticut. Come,
Does
How do you
land
pay for land?
ownership mean the same thing now as it did at the beginning of our country?
good.
I'm like a real eighth grader.
When is the beginning of our country?
Who decides disputes about land ownership? Who owns most of the land now in Connecticut?
How many landowners are there?
Can anyone own land?
We'll just make one big group. So anybody, Tony, you even had a question. We'll take you off the job as reporter. You could ask a question if you want.
These are actually coming out really good. How do you pay for land?
Mhm.
How do you determine how much land costs?
Anyone else?
Who owns the land now that they were able to buy it?
Now, by the way, if this is done in the classroom, I've found that the questions spill out more rapidly than they are right here. But God for me for being critical. I'm not being critical, but it's just oftentimes when kids, and you know what else? If you're going to do this with a group of eighth graders, somebody's going to ask a stupid question, a dumb question. Anybody got one? What's an eighth grade question that's slightly off the track here?
What makes it so one can own the land?
Okay.
Can all people own land anywhere?
Why do I want land?
I'm thinking like for questions eighth graders would ask that you aren't necessarily looking for, something like, can I buy a mountain? Stuff like that.
Yeah.
Those come up a lot too.
You know what they are, Donna? Those questions, they're vaguely associated with the topic, but not incredibly so. Can I buy a mountain? Great.
Can I buy Fenway Park?
Yes. Okay, so that's the part. Now you notice, by the way, I'm not an idiot. I'm aware that we're all really not eighth graders, but you realize that did elicit some fairly decent questions, right? That elicited some fairly different. Why is it important that there be no commentary during this? Why is it important that no one say good question or something like that, do you think?
So that all questions are created equal and there's an opportunity later to discuss the answers to them.
Exactly, right.
There's also
Thanks, Leslie. We'll see you. Go
there's
ahead, Tracy.
there's also something in the literature about accountable talk where if you validate responses, it can shut down other responses. So so it's better at least initially, to just generate the ideas without validating and keep them coming.
Right. Because you know what? If I said, first off, the people who do this, the Right Question Institute people, after studying many classes, there's reticent kids. There's kids that don't normally talk, but if they know that no matter what they say, nobody's going to say good question, and nobody's going to comment on the questions, will, not every kid, but will that encourage at least some reticent kids to speak up?
I believe there's research to support that,
Right.
yes, more kids will speak
Right.
up.
Lisa, were you going to say something?
Yes, I was going to say that's why we incorporated a lot of the write your question on the sticky note. Everybody gets it done at the same time. Then when they're posted, we read them aloud and anybody could read them and it's more equal. Nobody's on the spot.
And what happens when two kids are like, when one kid says, oh, great, good question. Well, you know what? Again, what will the more reticent kid, will that more reticent kid be less likely to participate? If he knows or she knows or they know that people are being judgmental. So, Lauren, we've got our questions, right? Next step is that we're going to now characterize your questions as closed or open-ended. Okay. Now, could I ask you, Tony, I know that you haven't been paying much attention the last couple of days in class, but you're trying. I'll give you credit. That talk with your mother that I had was helpful the other night. But
Hey, this activity though is really getting me excited. I'm gonna tell you that.
okay,
I know why. No one's judging me as I'm putting my answers down.
there you go. Good job. So
I'm listening right now.
Tony, what's the difference between an open-ended and a closed-ended question?
I mean, I work with 8th graders and they can answer this question, which is great. I think they've heard this before. So closed-ended would be, a limited range of responses. Yes, no, a number would be a closed-ended response. Open-ended is more, I guess, interpretive. The students would say, you have to, there's more explanation that you need as opposed to just a simple defined answer set. They use that term, defined answer set too. They use it off. They use it often. Just kidding.
Tony, is there a value? What value do closed-ended questions have? Is there a value to closed-ended questions?
Yeah, I mean, they're a little bit more definitive. You know what I mean? I think a closed-ended question, a lot of times compelling questions, I've seen them as almost like a closed-ended kind of answer. Yes, no. And because there's usually some sort of debate or argument that kind of goes along with it. But open-ended questions are equally as valuable, obviously.
Tracy, yes.
What I would add is that I can't necessarily think of an example off the top of my head right at this moment, but like, let's say I can think of a theater example. Let's say there's like knowledge that you want kids to have to then be able to apply in something more open. So you would ask a closed-ended question to just make sure they have it. So for example, in theater, you create tableaus and there's different kinds of emphases that you can create. You can create direct emphasis, duo emphasis, diversified emphasis. And I want kids to just know the difference between those three so that then they can create and apply them in a sophisticated way. So I might just say, what kind of tableau is this? Direct, duo, or diversified? Just so I can check that they've got that so that they then can apply it.
Mm-hmm. Heather, could I ask you a question? So could you define for us an open-ended question?
One that's
What
going
if-
to have a variety of different answers to it. It might be something that you're going to provide some evidence, but that evidence could be varied based on how you're answering. It might, and it would be the opposite of a definitive, essentially.
Right. Yes, and could I ask you, what is are there advantages and disadvantages of open-ended questions?
I guess yes and no, right? So some of the disadvantages might be just struggling to get to a clear, I guess not a clear answer, but you want to make sure that kids are going in the right direction. So if their open-ended answer is, it might be incorrect based on what they are providing, or maybe they're just going down the wrong route with their answer, like I am right now.
No, you're doing fine.
But I think it also just provides opportunity and for those to just think in different ways too, and to provide, what that support is in their answer.
Donna or Tony, as people in middle schools, how do you find open-ended questions, advantages and disadvantages for 8th graders?
I think open-ended questions do tend to increase student engagement, and also the piece about having to justify their reasoning and having a better variety of explanations that they could give. But I also just want to mention that teachers that I work with had some struggles with realizing that an open-ended question doesn't mean every answer that is given is correct. A question is separately classified as right or wrong and open or closed. So sometimes it just is a conversation that's good to have with the teacher, that just because the question is open-ended doesn't mean that every student gets it right no matter what they say.
Critical point.
And also good to have that conversation with the students.
Anyone else on this? So we won't do, Lauren, could you just read the first 3 questions that you have there?
The first question is, who owns the land now that we are able to buy it?
Okay.
What makes it?
Thank you. Can you just, I apologize, but so would you say that's an open-ended or closed-ended question?
I would say close.
Because there's a specific answer to that question. What's the second question?
What makes it so that people can own land? This could be a little bit more on the open side, but also a closed-ended question, because you can have a variety of answers depending on the perspective you take. And then lastly, why do I want land? I think that one also is more, it could be open-ended, but then some students may argue they don't want land. So, but I think it leans more towards open-ended, because the reasons why people would want to own land could be varied.
Okay, can you see some of them are harder to judge? But and then the next part of the protocol, by the way, would say that you take one open-ended and turn it into a closed, and you take one closed and turn it into an open. But you'll get that on the, Tony, I did this one slide, we did this one slide thing that you've been seeing, and I'll make sure that gets in.
Yep.
I have a question. Can I just interrupt? If we have questions on the board and that the students have posed, would you then do some backward kind of teaching, thinking, where you then focus on, well, this is what we're going towards as your summative, which of these questions will get us there and which will not? Like, are we ever going to would we introduce a more specific goal for these?
Let's just do the next step.
Thank you.
And we'll see if this helps us.
Thank you.
So remember, the overall goal was by Sam, who's after she gave us that bag, this, thanks, Sam, but is land ownership in Connecticut. So that's the thing we're going to do an inquiry. That's the overview thing. Now, Lauren, the next thing for all of us, and we've got a pretty good big group here, but we can do it. We have to now pick what you think are the three most important statements. What are the three most important questions of all the ones asked? Okay, so Lauren, could you slowly, so just as Lauren reads them, we're going to pick what we think are the three most important questions of all of them. Go ahead, Lauren.
Does land ownership mean the same thing today as it did? When is the beginning of our country? Is America a land of political, economic, and social opportunity? Who decides disputes over land ownership? How do I pay, or how do you pay for land? How do you determine how much land costs? How is land ownership established? Can anyone own land? Who owns the land now that we are able to buy it? What makes it so that people can own land? Why do I want land? Can anyone own land anywhere? Can I buy a mountain? Can I buy Fenway Park? I think that was the end.
By the way, there were some I hope you agree, there were some very cool questions in there. Very cool questions. So does anyone have a vote? Anybody, do any of those questions strike you as especially important? Lisa, I think you were going to say something or no?
I was just looking, how is land ownership established? I think that.
Okay. How is land ownership established? There's a vote for that one. Anyone have another one that they would like? Tracy.
I vote for something like who gets to own land, or yeah, I guess I'll say that. Who gets to own land? Which might be the same question, just and phrased differently. The same one that Lisa identified, but phrased differently.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. I also like how do you determine how much land costs? Because, you know, thinking as an adult, a lakefront property versus, you know, a piece of land in the middle of nowhere. So I think that would provoke a lot of talk.
Anyone else have another one that they'd like?
Somebody
Okay, go ahead, please, Tracy.
asked a question about how do you resolve, oh yeah, who decides disputes over land ownership, or how do you resolve dispute? I like how do you resolve disputes, and and like a then and now kind of thing, right? Like, but maybe we don't have to do the then and now, but just how are disputes over land, or how have they and how are they resolved?
Mm-hmm. And by the way, side note, you notice I mentioned before about the like not totally like how can I buy Fenway Park or something? You notice those questions when you get to this point, almost always that question isn't going to make the cut here probably. So I would say still write the question down in that initial stage, but when you get to this stage, that question is not going to probably move forward.
Is there a stage where you kids get to like revise the questions, right? Like we're choosing the three most important ones, right? And so I was just saying that I liked the one about resolving disputes. And I'm sorry, I'm just taking notes, and I wrote, how have land disputes been resolved over time? And I was like, oh wait, that's how I like it, because it gets the over time
Right.
thing in there. So I'm just curious about the revising of the
There
question.
is a point. So how about the next? Lauren, you're looking at the questions that won, right? That quote unquote were most popular. Is there some resolution in those questions? Can we make some subject that we, with our top choices, can we find something that we want to do our inquiry on?
I think that last question kind of encompasses all of the top questions. How have disputes over land ownership been resolved over time? Because then we're able to address who gets to own land and how land ownership is established when we focus on just that one question.
I think that's a great, that's a great way to, what do you think? Are we, is there a way that you would want to slightly revise that, or are we good with that question? Now,
I know, just really quickly, Steve, I just want to bring up that this part of the process is the part where the students, just like we are right now, are thinking the most, right? So there is silence, right? And there is discussion about the wording, right? This is where they start to get into the nuance of what the question is and what the question means.
right.
And I actually like it when they struggle, just like Steve's kind of letting us hang out here on video. That's going to go on YouTube. Thanks, Steve. So like this struggle, right, is part of that process, that iterative process. Sorry, I just wanted to throw in those 2 cents there, Steve. Thanks.
Right. So you notice through this process that our group has decided we've created the questions. We've narrowed the questions, and we've created a question that we're interested in doing. There's our question. And it's almost the compelling question that could start our inquiry, isn't it? We've already got our compelling question from our inquiry. But do you notice that it's not a disadvantage, but the factor, if we have 5 other groups in the room, they've all created their own questions, and they may have created a completely different compelling question to guide their inquiry. Is that okay? Because you realize our topic is land ownership in Connecticut. Yet all 5 of the groups may be researching that and coming up with answers to that have little or nothing in connection with another groups. So I'll ask the question again, is this meeting, Lisa or someone was asking about the final end product. Would this be okay from your end? If from right now, each of the, say for the sake of argument, 5 groups in our end, they've created what they want to look at, they've created what's interesting to them. Is it okay from this point that it doesn't matter what the other groups are doing? They've got a topic they're interested in, let them go with it.
So I'm making some connections to the sessions yesterday, right? I'm making some connections between what somebody shared about, distinctions between curriculum design and instructional design, right? So your curriculum design could have a compelling question like the one that we arrived at. How have land disputes been resolved over time? But in the instructional design, a teacher could decide to provide the topic and have students generate questions and land at a compelling question and use that instead of the one that's in the curriculum design. But the curriculum design guided the teacher to have students do a QFT on the topic of land ownership in Connecticut. So like that's one thought that's going through my mind. The other thought that's going through my mind, I thought was a really important point, which I think is comforting potentially for teachers, which is that there's three kinds of inquiry. You can have open, guided, and closed, right? And this is very wide. You could have a compelling question such as how have land disputes resolved over time in your curriculum design, and you could start there for a QFT and generate some topics, you know, that are a little more focused. And I think that's what I meant when I said at the beginning, right? So I'm just sort of thinking about the different ways this could work and making connections between what folks shared yesterday.
And you know, Tracy, and this was already mentioned, but what some people do is they create the compelling questions. I know somebody said this probably 4 times, and then they have the kids create the supporting questions. What do we need to know in order to address the compelling question? That's another way to state the obvious. There is no right way to do it. I mean, there's 50 ways of inquiry. I'm just presenting to you here what the Right Question Institute, what they would say is the right way to do it. And I would just share the whole thing again is question focus. What are we doing it on? Produce your questions. Here's the rules. Improve your questions. That's the closed-ended, open-ended thing analysis. Strategize, prioritize your questions. What's the next step? Share and reflect. Now, could I ask you, do you think this is suitable for what grades could you do this in? I mean, do you think you could pull this off? That's horribly phrased. Do you think you could do this in what grades do you think this could work in?
I think this could work at any grade. I think that where the teacher's expertise in planning needs to go is maybe in the areas where questions get generated that are perhaps a little beyond what students can handle, what's age appropriate, or what concepts they might be missing in background knowledge. Like there will be a lot of considerations in terms of resources and the expectations of what is appropriate for students to learn and produce at different ages. But the process itself is, like Dr. Swan said in the video at the beginning, is a very natural human process of asking questions and then getting the information you need to answer them.
One thing I do in first grade is it's harder for students to ask those questions in the beginning of a unit. For instance, I have little word cards that say do, so they might choose a card and they have to ask a question that begins with do or is instead of what or where, which tend to be the closed questions. And it's really fascinating to me because they then want those cards. They want to cheat and get the cards, So it's really cute, but you have to realize that as an early age, they're not used to that open-endedness. There's a right and wrong for them.
I have a wondering, and maybe Lisa can weigh in on this or somebody else with the early primary grades. Certainly asking questions and generating questions, I can see all ages, but I do wonder about the concept of open and closed and whether that's something that piece of the process makes sense, down to kindergarten. I could certainly see third graders. I'm not sure, what age level, because it's a little abstract. So I'm wondering about that, and maybe somebody wants to weigh in.
I think we have to show them by doing in those early grades. And for instance, I'm one whose bulletin board doesn't look like it all got dittoed and cut out and colored. So mine is, but I'm very, very aware of how I ask a question instead of, just commenting on a child's work. I think the open-endedness also promotes the individuality, and instead of, there's no comparing. There's less comparing when it's open-ended. There's less comparing when everybody's artwork looks different, because they're not all supposed to look like this one thing. Same with the questioning. Ask the question. Make sure you as a teacher are asking those kinds of questions as well. And
Lisa, what I meant was I agree that kids can ask open-ended questions. What do you think about the step in the process of categorizing questions, like asking your first graders to categorize questions as open or closed? Is that something you would ask them to do, or is that conceptually they're not quite ready for?
I might do an example of showing what a closed question is like, where there's only one answer, and make it more concrete for them to say, does that have one answer? If I were going to give you, speaking of like when we were talking about the Civil War and this being for 8th grade, if there's a right answer, I'm probably going to be giving the children that information before they're going to go off and do their investigative work or inquiry. And for younger children, they can handle it, because the more curious they are, I can show them, see, you don't know. You don't have an answer right now if we discuss this question. So that's good. But if you all say yes or no, or that's true, or you all have the same answer, then we're pretty much done. It's not going to be any fun. So I think they can categorize it once you do some hands-on, some real concrete stuff.
And I'll add on to what Lisa said, because I loved all of that. Also, I think a lot of the closed questions tend to be yes, no. I'm not saying they all are, but a lot of them are yes, no. So if a question is yes, no, like we said in an earlier step, like modeling how you can change the wording of the question so it's not a yes, no question anymore, and it opens it up. That even if younger kids don't have the vocabulary for what's happening with that question, they still can do that to a question.
I think in first grade, most of the time when the children ask a question, they might say, I don't get it, or can you help me with this? And I'm always saying, you have to be more specific. Ask me a question or do that. And it starts at those very natural points that they're just used to saying, I don't get it, and someone's showing them how to do some math problem. But ask me, be more specific. And that stuff it tapers over into this. It carries over into how they ask and how they speak and how they write. So you really have to be on top of that.
Could I also make I assume an obvious point that students of all grades wouldn't innately know how to do this from day one, right? So I might suggest, I'll just say this. I know what some teachers do. The first 1, 2, 3 inquiries of the year, they sort of model this themselves. And then as the year moves along, that's maybe when you start to get the kids to do their own compelling questions. But I wouldn't think that this is something that I would start from the first day of the year or something like that. So any additional thoughts on this? I think, we talked at length about this in yesterday's presentation. So for those that were there, my apologies. But I wouldn't, to make the compelling question for the inquiry, that can be hard to get the exact right compelling question. And I think I shared this yesterday. I've had some lousy inquiries. And in retrospect, the reason that they were lousy, I think, is because the compelling question I constructed at the beginning wasn't quite right. So I would again recommend, if you're interested in inquiry in general, going to the C3 Teachers site. And if you're interested in more of this procedure, go to the Right Question Institute site. And there, by the way, you do have to register, but it's just to register. There's no cost or anything. But there are videos of classes doing this at all levels, by the way. So if that's something that you want to, if that's something you want to check out, it's sitting there for you too. Anything else from anybody? I found that, by the way, that Kathy Swan video that we started with, if you are introducing somebody to inquiry, I think that's it's sort of a real practical way to do that. You know, because, well, you know what? Kids all the time ask questions. This is just a way to sort of use that in a way. So.